Hey there, Algebra 2 students. Today we need to talk about graphing the functions sine of x and cosine of x. So let's start with the sine function, right? We have talked about finding sines of angles. We've talked about them being ratios in triangles. And we've talked about the unit circle a little bit. And we've talked about how all of the y values correspond with the sine of the angle on the unit circle. And if we use the angle 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, we can use those points to help us graph the sine function, right? So if we look at 0 degrees or 0 radians, the y value here is 0. So that, I'm making a little chart, right? So when x is 0, y is 0. So it goes through the point 0, 0. At pi over 2, the sine is 1. At pi, the sine is 0. At 3 pi over 2, the sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1. Right, and if we go back to 2 pi, the sine of 2 pi is 0. So I have this little chart, right, 0, 0. Pi over 2 corresponds with 1, and so I plot that point here. Pi is 0, 3 pi over 2 is negative 1, and 2 pi is 0. And these are the 5 key points, right? 5 key points, and I'm going to connect those points with a smooth curve, as smooth as I can make, right? And you can see that the maximum value occurs at 1, the minimum value occurs at negative 1, and it crosses the x-axis, or the y, at 0, pi, and 2 pi, right? So the x-intercepts occur at plus or minus pi, plus or minus 2 pi, 0, plus or minus 3 pi, etc. This is a periodic function, right? This would continue on, this is just one cycle, one complete cycle, but it can continue, like if this was negative pi over 2, it would continue down like that. And then negative pi, it would come back up to there, and so on, right? This is the graph of the function y equals sine of x, right? And you need to know this. You need to know that it goes through the origin, and then it goes up to 1 at pi over 2, and it goes back down to 0 at pi, goes down to negative 1 at 3 pi over 2, and goes back up to 0 at 2 pi. You need to know what this graph looks like. Okay, I'm going to move this, set this aside, sort of out of the picture. Let's talk about cosine. When y equals the cosine of x. There we go. Well, sort of. Similarly, with the unit circle, you'd be looking at just the x values, though, right? So at 0, the x value is 1. So we have the point 0, 1, right? At pi over 2, the x value is 0, and so the cosine is 0. At pi, the x value is negative 1, so we plot that pi, negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, the x value is 0, and at 2 pi, we would be back to 1, right? And so I've listed those points here, and I have plotted them, 0, 1, pi over 2, 0, pi, negative 1, 3 pi over 2, 0, 2 pi, 1. And I'm going to connect these with a smooth curve as much as possible. This is also a periodic function, right? Notice again, the maximums happen at +1, the minimums happen at -1. It's crossing the x-axis at pi/2 and 3 pi/2, and basically odd multiples of pi/2. It could continue this way, right? And even further, this is the graph of y equals cosine of x. You need to know these 5 main points right here, this first cycle, right? That a plain old cosine function goes through the point 0, 1, right? And continues like that. These are the graphs of sine of x and cosine of x. You need to know these because we're going to use them in graphing other things that become more complicated very quickly. So I'm going to stop with this video. Reference this video when you are doing your homework, but also the next video. We'll see you in a minute or next time.